Russia is accused of terrorism, an incendiary device plot, and Lithuanian DHL plane is down in flames. Is that connected? And what is known so far? Another topic of today: can Poland and should it down Russian missiles? And third topic: Frank Ledwidge, senior lecturer in war studies at Portsmouth University, is with us tonight. Interview on UATV English. Good afternoon. These topics in more detail. My name is Henry Keane, and we are UATV English, bringing you the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine. Russia sends a hot message, quite literally. Eastern European officials said Russia's alleged plot to send incendiary devices by mail to Western countries, including the US, marked an, oh my God, who could ever think, escalation in Moscow's conflict with the West, presenting a challenge to governments trying to deter the Kremlin. Polish and other European officials said that agents very much suspected of working for the Russian military intelligence this summer posted a number of parcels packed with incendiary material from Lithuania to Britain in a dry run to see if such packages could also be sent by aircraft to North America, and if could, then this deadly mail would have been sent, no doubt about that. Luckily, and it was just luck and nothing else, the plot was foiled when two of those packages caught fire not in the air, but at DHL depots in the UK and Germany, respectively. The Kremlin denies any involvement. Seriously, did anyone expect Putin to say, yep, that's me? Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe has already flexed its traditional methods of diplomatic wrist slapping, kicking out more than 750 Russian diplomats. Strongly worded statements. In an array of sanctions aimed at denting Russia's military-industrial base, it is also pouring aid into Ukraine and offering more covert support, such as helping Ukraine to fire long-range missiles at Russian targets. Lithuania and Poland have consistently been amongst the most supportive countries of Ukraine in Europe and have criticized allies, including Washington, over what they believe is too much concern over the need to avoid escalating the conflict between the West and Russia. Avoiding escalation for too long leads to even more escalation. That much is obvious now. One crew member was killed after a cargo plane crashed early Monday on the outskirts of Vilnius Airport in Lithuania, skidded into a house and burst into flames. Remarkably, 3 others on board the flight, including the pilot, survived the crash, along with 12 people in the house who were safely evacuated. According to local authorities, the cargo plane flying from Leipzig, Germany, was due to land at Vilnius Airport when it crashed a few kilometers from the runway. The plane skidded on the ground for several hundred meters before hitting a residential house. Renata Spazila, chief of the Fire and Rescue Department of Lithuania, told reporters. The 3 rescued crew members, 1 Lithuanian national, 1 German, and 1 Spanish, remain in the hospital. The Lithuanian Fire and Rescue Department informs about that. There were no reported casualties on the ground, more than that. What is insane to me about all the above mentioned is that alleged style of calling spade not so much a spade in regard of this, or any other acts of Russian terror. The question, did Russia do it, is only a rhetorical one. Well, of course it did. When you see a bull and a pile of shit under it, you say bullshit. You can say, of course, a substance allegedly appearing to be feces under a bull-looking animal. Say all you want, the reality won't change. See terror in Europe these days? Think Russia. Russia is a terrorist country not because Henry Keane says so, but because Russia acts as such wherever and whenever it acts. In Europe, in America, in Ukraine, and Russia too, but that will be already a domestic issue. If Russian nation likes these dictatorial BDSM games played for centuries long, well, we could consider it their national consent and leave it up to them while it all stays inside them, inside Russia. And if not, what should the world do about it? 2 U.S. lawmakers have made a bipartisan appeal to President Joe Biden to allow Poland to shoot down Russian missiles over the skies of Ukraine. Republicans Joe Wilson and Steve Cohen, the chair and ranking member respectively of the US Helsinki Commission, made the call in a letter stating the obvious, of course, nevertheless, better late than never.
Despite Russia's continued escalation through hybrid warfare, airspace violations, attacks on critical infrastructure, and efforts to destabilize democratic institutions, we have hesitated to confront these threats decisively, allowing Russia to wage a war against the alliance with minimal consequences. US lawmakers Joe Wilson and Steve Cohen.
Well, in this obvious context, Poland's request to intercept and neutralize missiles over Ukraine is both necessary and urgent as a support mechanism of sort for Ukraine and a safeguard to the front line of NATO's borders. The technical and political possibility of Warsaw downing Russian missiles heading towards Poland through Ukraine was laid out in June in a signed Polish-Ukrainian security agreement. While Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski said at the time that the matter was still under discussion, Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz explained that a decision by all of NATO member states would be necessary to take this step. Well, then NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg opposed the move, insisting the alliance will not be involved in this conflict. Even so, it is de facto involved already, despite Stoltenberg's opposition to the very fact. Stoltenberg's successor, however, Mark Rutte, has yet to address the topic publicly. Is it just me? Or maybe it is indeed time to finally remove that outdated NATO all-parties consent paradigm on matters that are directly related to NATO's survival. Because otherwise, any Hungarian Orban or Slovakian Fico or German Wagenknecht can literally sell NATO to Putin. It has to be clear that Poland does not need anyone's consent to down missiles headed towards its territory. Full stop. Fullest stop possible. As democracy is not when everyone is talking to everyone about everyone's freedom, it's when someone finally finds both balls and common sense to exercise it. Frank Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer in War Studies at Portsmouth University. Hello, Mr. Ledwidge.
Good afternoon, Alexei.
Yeah, well, my name is Henry, but you can call me Alexei, no worries for that.
My apologies. So I think your producer is Alexei.
He's my
Henry
colleague of mine, yeah. Nevertheless, Alexei and Henry, we want to know, frontline, Kursk, and not only what is known, and how would you assess the situation in general and in particular?
Well, in general, the situation is, in the words of the British Defence Secretary, that the front line is unstable. And you can see symptoms of that in the western part towards Zaporizhia almost every day. And I don't think I'm giving any news here to people who follow this war reasonably closely. And whilst it's a little bit more stable in the central south region, up towards Chasiv Yar, there are indications of Russian moves up there. In Kursk, about 40% of the ground taken by Ukraine in August is now gone. But I would ask people to divert their attention, just to speak about the front for a minute, towards Zaporizhia, as there are indications of a building Russian offensive there. Now, having said that, it does seem that the Ukrainian army is prepared for that. And needless to say, one doesn't expect at any point the Ukrainians to break. I don't think that's going to happen. But what we are seeing is a daily attritional effort by the Russians, which is resulting in the loss of ground by Ukrainian forces.
So, long-range weapon strike on Russia, is that helping?
I've always taken the view that those long-range weapons, namely the so-called ATACMS, which are fired out of HIMARS launchers, or the Storm Shadows or Scalps fired from, in the case of Storm Shadow aircraft, are of marginal use. Essentially what they are explosive devices on the end of rockets, and Russia's fired thousands of those at Ukraine without decisive effect. Now, the stores that the Russians will have to deal with from the kind of attacks in terms of numbers, we're talking here about a few dozen. Perhaps there are 50 or so ATACMS, and I don't suspect more than that in terms of Storm Shadows. That's not significant enough to make a major difference. As you know, I think the significance of the Storm Shadow announcement and ATACMS is a bit more political than military.
Well, what will make the difference? Do you think Tauruses could help?
No, well,
It doesn't matter.
it's increment. No, I don't think. I don't see there's any such thing as a game changer. The key element in this war is manpower,
Right.
and the Russians will always have the edge on that.
But yeah, pardon me. You're right, absolutely. But I mean, can and will Trump or any son of a Trump ban long-range strikes again when back in the office? Do you think this is possible? Because even politically, it's something.
Well, he may. I can't look inside the head of Trump, and I have no privileged access at all.
Right, sorry for that.
But it's an excellent question overall. This issue of President Trump. And I suspect what you may see, what Ukraine may see,
Yeah, exactly.
because he has a certain strategy for negotiation, which tends to start with or requiring or commanding a position of strength. I suspect what we may see from Trump is either the threat of or the actual increase of weapons and support to Ukraine at the outset to provide that level of commanding heights, as it were, over Russia. So I don't see Trump necessarily as very bad news unless you're in a position where you take the view that the war should continue whatever happens, which would certainly have been the position of a Harris administration. I think Trump is not necessarily bad news for Ukraine. I've never thought that. Maybe bad news for Europe, but in the short term, not necessarily for Ukraine. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I'm glad you said it. And you said Harris and her position. What position? Like yielding ground constantly to any opposing force and then ending up to yielding ground to Trump. No, don't get me wrong. Biden and his administration done something and a lot for Ukraine, but not enough. And not enough is just nothing. Well, I may be too emotional, but you're getting me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Henry, decisions should have been, and we had this discussion last time, decisions should have been, if you wanted to win this war,
right.
And there's no evidence, by the way, that the Americans really did. I think it was their strategies tended to be, let's just keep this strung out so we can keep the Russians sustaining casualties and carrying on.
Right, yeah.
If anybody, that's it, yeah. And I've not seen any evidence to the contrary. Had they wanted to win it, of course, decisions should have been made 2 years ago, really to open up military stores for the Ukrainians, which was never done. There's only been a drip feed from the start. And that's one reason why the Ukraine is in the situation it's in now. There's no doubt about that.
Well, do you think that in terms of that intercontinental, that later turned into not so much intercontinental, but middle-range ballistic missile fired at Dnipro could help what the world's reaction to that should be? We can guess. But what it is, I can barely see any reaction. Or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a boiled frog syndrome, isn't it? Things get ratcheted up and very few people notice. I mean, I think, to be fair, from an expert perspective, there's no doubt at all that this was, in the words of one real expert on missile issues that I was speaking to, a massive escalation on the part of the Russians. And I'm certain that's being treated that way by the senior military staff. But I don't think necessarily politicians see that. I don't know whether they've been poorly briefed or what, but this was a major event. I think certainly the most significant event this year so far, apart from the fall of Avdiivka.
Well, some say, Tom Cooper, as an expert, he is an expert in aviation. I don't necessarily agree with him all the time, but sometimes he said things that I agree with. And he said that Putin is frustrated. And this is the sign of it. This middle-range rocket missile that costs from $50 to $100 million sent with effect of what?
Well, of course, there was inert warheads on it, so it wasn't intended to have tactical effect.
Yeah.
But the significant, or rather, it may well be that Putin was frustrated. I think he's probably frustrated in having his warnings ignored, and that brings us back to the Storm Shadow business. And I think that's a slightly separate issue from the war itself. Okay. But again, just as with Trump, who can know the thoughts of Putin?
Well, let's see anyway. I've asked all my questions. I have a lot more, but would love to have you. Yeah. Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Ledvidge, and for your time again. It was a pleasure and fast and very knowledgeable. Thank you.
My pleasure, Henry, as always. Look forward to talking again.
Thank you so very much. Certainly will. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Frank Ledvidge was with us, Senior Lecturer in War Studies at Portsmouth University. That was it for tonight. My name is Henry Keane. We are UATV English, doing our best to deliver hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Please like, share, and comment. Your voice matters as it helps Ukrainian voice to be heard globally. Stay safe and tuned for more. Goodbye.